July 2025. While America's political debate basically grinds to a standstill and focuses solely on Trump's potential involvement with Jeffrey Epstein, the Pentagon is preparing for its next war, and that's with China. Washington's got a tunnel vision, full-blown, obsessive tunnel vision, especially when it comes to this target, China. Trump's back in the Oval Office, round two, and his administration is laser focused on one thing. Well, actually, two things: getting out of Ukraine and prepping for high stakes showdown in the Western Pacific with China. I mean, they're virtually throwing everything at it. Billion-dollar defense budgets, non-stop war games, shiny new hypersonic missiles, bases popping up like fast food joints across the Pacific Rim. It's the full package, a military fever dream. And of course, it's all wrapped up in patriotic packaging. We've got to stop the China threat, protect freedom in the Indo-Pacific. Whose freedom? You've heard the slogans, they're everywhere. Fox, CNN, the think tanks, the op-eds. It's become the background noise, so constant you almost stop questioning it. But, and pause with me here, let's hit the brake just for a second. Just stop. Who actually benefits from all this chest thumping, the war drumming theater? Is it really about defending democracy, or is it just the latest chapter in an age-old American playbook where fear fuels budgets and budgets feed Boeing and Co? Because, I mean, that's obvious by now. Every time someone in DC says national security, there's a defense contractor somewhere popping champagne. So yeah, before we buy into this hype, maybe, just maybe, we should follow the money, track the incentives, ask the uncomfortable questions that never seem to make it into the press briefings. Is this build-up really about the people or about the profits? All right, before we dive in on that, for me, early Saturday morning, let me put something in the back of your mind. I just published a new exposé. Well, technically, it's an executive brief because it was written for senior execs at some of the biggest international tech firms. That exposé digs deep into the US war buildup against China. You might be surprised how far they have already advanced, and these preparations tell us something. Anyway, I'm analyzing how we got here, who stands to cash in on this whole escalation cycle, and where we got from here. And lucky me, Evarist Bartolo, Malta's former foreign minister, he took the time to read the whole thing, every page. And this is what he said about it when I interviewed him just 2 days ago.
What you have done there in your article, and I really appeal to those to start reading it and continue reading it till the end, because it's a formidable read, because not only do you give factual evidence, but you also provide the sources, obviously, to show whether what you're saying is factual or not, especially in today's age of disinformation and fake news. It's important that we still have such quality information available to us, which is built on facts and not simply on interpretations and on narratives.
Again, this was Malta's former foreign minister, Evarist Bartolo, a deeply knowledgeable man who has seen how Europe's and America's war machine works from the inside. I highly recommend watching my interview with him. But coming back to the expose he talked about here, being realistic, I know most people aren't going to sit down and read a report with more than 10,000 words. It's just not realistic. In fact, we know from multiple studies that, let's say, between 60 and 80% of internet users get most or all of their news just from the headlines, and around 75% of social media users share news links without clicking to read the full article. And for traditional print media, it's even worse. Makes you wonder why we keep writing articles in the first place. So that's exactly why I'm recording this on an early Saturday morning. Not as a substitute to the article, I still hope and recommend you to read it, but to underline the importance of what is going on behind the scenes right under our noses, and to make it easier for you to access this kind of information. Okay, let's talk about the business of war. Because, make no mistake, that's exactly what Washington snapped back to the moment Trump re-entered the White House in January 2025. They won, not even a grace period. Within hours of the inauguration, Trump's team called their Quad meeting, US, Japan, India, Australia, just to make sure nobody missed the memo. China's the main villain again, America's enemy number one. They rolled out the usual buzzwords: free and open Indo-Pacific, defending democracy, that's my favorite. You know the drill. And just in case anyone in Luxembourg was wondering, no, it wasn't about them. And here he was, Secretary of State Marco Rubio. Yeah, that Marco Rubio. I mean, you can't make this thing up. Grinning next to his Quad buddies, calling it a significant first step. So it's clear Trump didn't waste time. Within weeks, he was on stage declaring China an existential threat. Executive orders flew off his desk. Then in April, he pulled the classic Trump move, declared a national emergency over foreign economic threats. No point for guessing who that was aimed at. And the tariffs hit fast and hard in America, because China is not paying the tariffs, Americans do. Higher duties across the board, especially for countries with big trade surpluses. Translation: China. The justification? He says foreign trade hollowed out American industry. And get this, weakened the US defense base. That's right, Chinese imports are now a threat to national security. Convenient and ridiculous. Especially when you're also pushing for record-breaking defense budgets. I will come back to that in a moment. And yeah, he got them. The record-breaking defense budgets, I mean. Trump stood at the podium bragging about a 1 trillion military budget. Nobody's ever seen anything like it, he said, of course, superlatives. Which, okay, is technically true. It's the biggest in US history. A 12% bump from the last guy, the senile, elderly, you know who. You could almost hear Lockheed's stock price cheering in the background. Even Trump, in that weirdly candid way of his, admitting, too bad we have to do it. Hopefully we won't need it. Hopefully. But just in case, he's greenlighting missiles, warships, the whole shopping list, and pitching it all with that old classic: if you want peace, prepare for war. Right, of course, because nothing says peace like a $1 trillion arsenal aiming straight at Beijing. But let's not kid ourselves, Trump's not pushing this China confrontation solo. He wouldn't be able to do that. He's flanked by a cabinet and Congress stacked with die-hard China hawks, all eager to dial up the tensions. Take his new defense secretary, Pete Hegseth. Can you believe it? Yep, the ex-Fox News guy. I mean, this is becoming a travesty. Now he's running the Pentagon. With what qualifications? Only in America, right? And back in March, Hegseth flew to Manila, pounded his chest, and promised the Philippines that America's got their bags. Ironclad, he said. Classic deterrence theater. At a press conference, he leaned in hard. President Trump wants peace, of course. But to bring peace, we must be strong. His words. That line again. Peace with a $1 trillion arsenal behind it. The whole thing, like much of what's going on in the White House right now, was a pure performance. A stage. Hegseth standing shoulder to shoulder with Philippine officials, saying US admirals are ready, US weapons are coming, and Trump's rebuilding the military. Not subtle. And Beijing, of course, took notice, called it out for what it was, a provocation. They pointed out, correctly, that nobody's actually blocking freedom of navigation in the South China Sea. So, why is the US buzzing the region with warships and bombers? From China's angle, of course, it's the US fueling this. They accuse Washington of backing allies into petty provocations and fabricating a threat narrative. And honestly, they're not entirely off base. Meanwhile, back in DC, Congress is running literal war games. The House Shiny New Select Committee on China, chaired by hardliner Mike Gallagher, staged a simulated China invasion on Taiwan. High profile, big production. They brought in experts from CNAS, that's a think tank with deep defense industry ties, to run it. Spoiler, the simulation was a disaster. The US took heavy losses. Taiwan got isolated. Global trade collapsed. Cue panic. Gallagher emerged yelling that we need to arm Taiwan to the teeth now. Because if war breaks out, it will be too late. He even floated 2027 as the window for possible invasion. His takeaway? It's dereliction of duty. Well, I had to look that one up. Dereliction. It's dereliction of duty for US companies to ignore the China threat. Note, for US companies to ignore the China threat. And the subtext? We have got 19 billion arms backlog to Taiwan that needs to be moving yesterday. So yeah, the message is crystal clear. Deterrence means flooding Taiwan with weapons. Not tomorrow, now. The investigative journalist Patrick Barb called it the Ukrainization of Taiwan. The link to my interview with him is in the description. And hey, the Ukrainization of Taiwan. If you're Lockheed Martin or Raytheon, that's music to your shareholders' ear. No? And they're not alone. Think tanks flush with defense cash are flooding the zone with reports. CSIS, for example, I think it was CSIS, they ran a major war game simulating a Taiwan invasion 24 times. And while the US, Japan, Taiwan side won, in most scenarios the price tag was just obscene. We're talking dozens of US ships sunk, hundreds of aircrafts destroyed, tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands dead. 2 US carriers at the bottom of the Pacific. Whole airbases leveled. Taiwan's economy obliterated. And that's if they win. CSIS big conclusion. Hard to fathom. Ramp up deterrence immediately, meaning spend more, deploy more, prepare for hell.
War with China would produce destruction on a scale unseen by the United States since 1945. China continues to strengthen its military and maintains the right to use force against Taiwan. U.S. officials warn that a Chinese invasion is a real possibility and imply that the U.S. would become involved in such a conflict. Although conflict is not inevitable, it is not impossible. CSIS conducted 24 wargame iterations of a Chinese invasion of Taiwan. The good news is that Chinese forces were unable to conquer the island, and Taiwan endured as an autonomous democracy. The challenges confronting a Chinese invasion are formidable. However, the costs were sobering. In 4 weeks of fighting, the United States typically lost hundreds of aircraft, 2 aircraft carriers, and up to 24 other ships. Bases on Guam were devastated. The Taiwanese economy suffered extensive damage. Japan was often dragged into the war and its bases attacked. China also took terrible losses, often including more than 100 warships and tens of thousands of soldiers killed, wounded, or captured. Such a failure might endanger the Chinese Communist Party's grip on power. The war might last until exhaustion, producing an unstable peace with recurring conflict. The terrifying possibility of nuclear escalation also looms over any war involving 2 nuclear powers. The costs and risks for both sides strongly argue for avoiding war. Both will need to pursue political and diplomatic strategies that contribute to that end. For the United States and its allies, military deterrence will be a crucial part of that equation. How can that be achieved? The United States should harden bases, work with allies, particularly Japan, for additional basing options, continue to make its forces more survivable, and buy more long-range missiles, particularly anti-ship missiles, because some inventories are critically low. The Taiwanese can adopt the porcupine strategy, deploy more mobile anti-ship missiles, build a fully manned and highly capable army, and spend less on expensive and vulnerable ships and aircraft. Deterrence is possible and affordable, but it will require planning, some resources, and political will.
So here you go. There's the pattern. Problem, reaction, solution. They paint this nightmare scenario, World War III over Taiwan, and then, surprise, the solution is always more weapons, more deployments, more Pentagon cash. It's the logic of hawks. And right now, this logic is running the show. Am I really the only one who sees the shadows of Ukraine here? And the folks wargaming this stuff? They are not neutral. They bounce between think tanks, defense boards, and the Pentagon. Their reports always land on the same conclusion. We're not ready yet. We need more. More missiles, more troops in Asia, more deterrence, and most and foremost, more money. And who would have guessed? Trump's virtually handing them blank checks. Now let's talk about what the US is actually doing in the Indo-Pacific. Because the rhetoric is loud, sure, but the moves on the board, they're even louder. Since Trump returned in January, the Pentagon's been on a deployment spree. Chess pieces flying across the map like they are 2 moves away from checkmate. South China Sea, Taiwan Strait. The US isn't just signaling anymore, they are staging. They're staging for a coming war. Start with this. In January, the US and the Philippines launched their first joint naval patrol of the year. But there were not just a couple of ships doing laps. The Navy rolled out in a full carrier strike group. The US Carl Vinson front and center, sailing right through the contested waters China claims as its own. Imagine this would be the other way around. That kind of hardware, that close to Chinese claimed reefs. That's not a patrol, that's a message. We are back and we are not tiptoeing. And that was just the prelude. By spring, US Special Forces were drilling with Philippine Marines on the Batanes Islands. That's the northern tip of the Philippines. It's just a short hop from Taiwan. It's exactly the kind of spot you'd stage from if, say, a Taiwan conflict broke out. Hexet even confirmed it publicly. These kind of exercises are not deterrence. That's rehearsal. And then, of course, came the weapons. The Pentagon flew in the Nemesis batteries. These are mobile ship-killing missile launchers. And for the first time, they left them there. Usually that gear goes back home after the exercise. Not this time. They're pre-positioning firepower now. Clearly, they're setting the table early. And on top of that, each Marine's new favorite toy, drone boats. Kamikaze-style unmanned surface vessels for surveillance or better, attack. Hexet laid it all out during his trip to Manila. More joint training, more access, more hardware. The Philippines has opened 4 new bases to US forces, inclusive sites like Luzon, right near Taiwan, and Palawan, overlooking the South China Sea. And these US engineers that were in the news, they're not just visiting, they're building fuel depots, runways, storage hubs. One naval base is specifically being upgraded to host US drone boats and fast boats for operations in the region. It's the biggest forward posture shift we have seen since the Cold War. And the best part, it's not even secret. On the contrary, they're bragging about it. Congress just put another $11 billion into the Pacific Deterrence Initiative, if that's not a euphemism. Airfields in Guam, power grids across Micronesia, 3D printers for spare parts on site, $870 million in military aid to Taiwan alone. This isn't theory, it's prep work. It reads like someone wargamed a fight with China and turned the output into a budget request. And as is standard operating procedure, the US pulls in its allies. Japan's now doubling its defense spending, its biggest military expansion since World War II. Trump's back in the picture and Tokyo's moving in lockstep, even if it means buying more American gear that they actually like. This year, Japan, the US and the Philippines had the first ever 3-way naval drill in, you guessed it, the South China Sea. Meanwhile, and not surprisingly, Australia is sliding deeper into the fold. Under AUKUS, they are preparing to host rotation squadrons of US B-52 bombers, nuclear-capable, long-range Cold War relicts rebranded as power projection tools. The kind that Ukraine just attacked in Russia. 6 of them will soon be stationed in northern Australia. And let's be very clear. If you got American bombers parked on your tarmac, you're not just adjacent to a future war, you're in it. One Australian analyst called it what it is, the tip of the spear, meaning Australia. And in wartime, well, that means that your bases, Australian bases, Tyndall, Pine Gap, all of them, they go straight to the top of China's missile target list. I mean, that can be a surprise. And that brings us back to AUKUS. You've heard of it. Nuclear submarines, tech sharing, massive defense deals. It's the most ambitious military pact Australia ever signed. And they're dropping in a staggering 368 billion on it. But here's also where it gets a bit messy. Because Trump didn't broker AUKUS. Biden did. And the two are not exactly best buddies. And Trump, of course, is not exactly a fan of deals he didn't cut. So when he got back in, he ordered the Pentagon to do a snap review of the whole thing. He put Elbridge Colby, a guy who prefers short-term firepower over long-term alliances, at the helm. The review dragged on for months. Aussie and British officials were left sweating, unsure if the entire submarine plan was about to unravel. In the end, most think Trump will stick with it. Too many chips on the table. But the fact that the whole thing wobbled the moment Trump got back in, that allies had to lobby to keep a deal aimed at deterring China, that tells you something. And while the suits argue in DC, the work quietly continues. US nuclear subs are already circling through Aussie ports. Aussie sailors are training on American and British boats. Pillar 2 of AUKUS, tech sharing. It's picking up speed too. Hypersonics, cyber, quantum. So in short, the Indo-Pacific is being fortified fast. Missiles, warship, bombers, bases, all of it. The architecture to deterrence is being built in real time. But here's the catch. Deterrence and provocation. Sometimes they look a little too much alike. And if you're sitting in Manila, Tokyo or Darwin, it's starting to feel like the front row now. Alright, let's talk about money. Because while everyone is busy waving flags and talking deterrence, the Pentagon's cash pipeline is gushing. Trump's latest defense request clocks in at just under 900 billion. Nearly $1 trillion when you fold in the extras. That's more than the next 10 countries combined, most of whom, by the way, are our allies. How much is $1 trillion? Well, there are too many zeros to tell, but think about it this way. If you would get paid $1 or €1 each second, it would take more than 31,000 years to pay you 1 trillion. That's longer than human civilization. Get it? And what's it all for? Well, officially to deter China in the Indo-Pacific and to revitalize America's defense industrial base. Translation: build more weapons faster and make more money. That's revitalize. Congress, totally on board. In fact, the House gave the budget its own MAGA-flavored nickname, the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. And no, that's not satire. It's real. Again, you can't make the thing up. So where's all this money going? A lot of it is feeding the usual suspects. Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, General Dynamics. But there's a shift happening too. Fewer F-35s, fewer big ships, more money for drones, missile precision ammunition, the stuff that's tailor-made for a war in the Pacific. And more money for the big tech companies. I'm working on a piece about this very topic, so subscribe if you don't want to miss it. And then, of course, we got Trump's pet project, a Golden Dome missile defense shield for the whole of the US homeland. Remember Reagan's SDI program? It sounds like something ripped from a science fiction movie, but the budget is real. Critics call it Star Wars 2.0. Hugely expensive, highly speculative. So what did the White House do? They quietly moved the funding into a separate request so it wouldn't drag down the core budget. And Congress added 25 billion anyway. Beijing's response, not surprisingly, pure fire. Chinese officials are calling the whole thing wanton militarism. They say it reflects America's faith in might makes right, that they'll drag the whole world into disaster. And that, here's the jab, it's being paid for with ill-gotten wealth extracted from the global system. That's a stingy one. Honestly, I don't think they're that wrong. A lot of the spending is underwritten by dollar dominance, we know that, and by foreign debt buying. Meanwhile, back in the dry docks, the US Navy's been struggling to keep its fleet even seaworthy. Decades of cost overruns and maintenance backlogs have left warships virtually sidelined. Over the last few years, 3/4 of US carrier and sub-maintenance was late. 7,000 cumulative days of ships stuck at the dock. So now, of course, a scared Congress is throwing tens of billions into fixing shipyards, new dry docks, robotics, workforce training. The goal? Rebuild the fleet fast enough to counter China's navy, which, by the way, is already the biggest in the world by number of ships. But maybe the biggest shift isn't ships or missiles, it's drones. We saw this in Ukraine. The Pentagon's new buzzword is replicator. That's a program to flood Indo-Pacific with swarms of autonomous drones by 2025. Land, sea, air, thousands of them, all cheap. They are networked and expandable, basically quality over quantity, but high-tech. Think robot locust with targeting software. Deputy Secretary Kathleen Hicks framed it this way: if China has the numbers, we're gonna out-drone them, saturate the zone, drown them in swarms. The first replicator systems are already rolling out, some public, like the kamikaze drones for the Navy. Others are totally classified. They've set aside $1 billion just to get them off the ground. And then there's space. Yep, space. In July 2025, Space Force ran its largest ever war game, Resolute Space 2025. And what were they practicing? Orbital combat. That's not a joke. Over 700 Guardians and allied forces training on satellite warfare, jamming, blinding, maneuvering, maybe even striking. The head of Space Force, General Jan Salzman, said straight-faced that the US is preparing to fight and win in space. That's where we are now, space as strategic doctrine. And just to drive home this point, Trump's budget includes funding for the X-37B. That's a secretive unmanned space plane that looks like a mini space shuttle, but definitely isn't delivering mail. Nobody's saying what it's for, but the quiet part's loud enough. If war breaks out, satellites are targets, and the US plans to play offense. So, when we zoom out, what do we see? We see a $1 trillion arsenal in motion, swarms of drones, space war rehearsals, hypersonics, carrier groups in choke points, Congress drunk in defense cash, and the president who sells it all as strength, but builds it like a business. It's not just a military buildup, it's a business model, and that model only works if the threat never goes away. So everything we talked about, the drills, the deployment, the drones, it all circles back to one place, Taiwan. That's the powder keg, the tripwire, the reason all this firepower is moving east, or so we are made to believe. Let's start with the so-called trainers. Back in 2021, it was leaked that a small number of US military personnel were on the island. A handful of special ops guys, or so they said. By 2025, that handful has grown, quietly of course, into about 500 military trainers. A retired admiral not so long ago dropped that little gem in a congressional hearing. He even said, we need to double it. Of course, they want more. You have to realize that's already battalion scale. You can say, of course, they're not combat troops, fine. But if a shooting war starts, those 500 Americans, they're not going to sit in the barracks. And it's not just people either, it's their gear. Taiwanese troops recently fired HIMARS rockets made in the US, built by Lockheed, in live exercises. with American contractors standing right there. You see where this is going. The line between training and joint ops is starting to blur. If missiles start flying, who is coordinating? Who is targeting? Who is staying behind the curtain? Again, where have we seen this before? Right, Ukraine. And then there's, of course, the logistics. Why? Because every war game tells the same story. In a real fight with China, US munitions run out fast, like 2 weeks fast. So knowing that, they're racing to stash gear in forward locations makes sense for them. These are not maybe if preparations. These are when it happens, we'll need this already in place preparations. And Beijing, of course, they see it all, and they're not shrugging. The Chinese army is running non-stop pressure ops, missile drills, warplanes crossing Taiwan's air defense zones daily, naval flotilla flexing just offshore. It's not even subtle anymore. They're trying to normalize the threat. Say it without saying. This is our turf. Don't push it. And they have an argument. They have an argument because US destroyers keep transiting the Taiwan Strait. Standard freedom of navigation ops. But under Trump 2.0, they're happening more often, more forward. Each time China protests, each time tension ratchets up a notch. Meanwhile, the rhetoric is also heating up fast. US media now frames Taiwan as the Ukraine of Asia. Of course they want to make this link. Democracy is under siege. Xi is cast as the next Putin. Convenient, right? Congress, they're taking delegation selfies in Taipei, which every time triggers Chinese jets flying overhead like clockwork. And Trump being Trump, he keeps being highly inconsistent. Sometimes he muses about letting China take Taiwan. Other times it's total support. But his administration, very clear. More potholes, more arms. Rumors that VP J.D. Vance or Marco Rubio might visit Taipei. That will be a diplomatic hand grenade, comparable to Ariel Sharon visiting the Temple Mount. And I can't help to associate Trump's Golden Defense Dome with the image of the Temple Mount. From Beijing's point of view, and not surprising, strategic ambiguity is starting to look a lot like open provocation. State media is screaming that Washington is backing separatists. They are watching as Taiwan gets the same treatment as Ukraine did. First advisors, then arms, now land-lease deals for drones and missiles. And that's exactly where it's getting dangerous. Because both sides now feel they have to show strength. The US arms Taiwan to deter China. China escalates to deter the US. And Taiwan, it's stuck in the middle, signaling resolve to both sides, but risking miscalculation every time a jet crosses a line or a trainer hits a switch. Bottom line, this isn't just a flashpoint. It's a fuse, and it's getting shorter and shorter. Now we come to my favorite topics, economic warfare and especially Propaganda Blitz. Because here's the thing, war prep isn't just tanks and carrier groups. It's also tariffs, exports, bans and headlines. The frontline isn't just the Taiwan Strait, it's also your supply chain and your news feeds. Trump's back, as we all know, and with him economic warfare. He re-invoked emergency powers to slap tariffs across the board, flip-flopping from 10% on everything to 140 and back. Beijing wasn't amused, of course. They called it wanton economic force, and who can blame them? Said it's failed before and will fail again. But Trump? He sees tariffs as the ultimate multi-tool. Every problem hit with a tariff. Protect American workers, punish China, win back Midwest voters. Simple stories, good politics. Guys, I hate to bring it to you, but China is not paying their tariffs. You do. Check it out. But under the surface, it's even more complicated. The tech war, that's where things get really surgical. Biden laid the groundwork with chip bans and export controls. Trump's team doubled down, briefly floated, cutting China off from even more semiconductors. Then, classic Trump reversed course again a bit. In Q1 2025, they hinted Nvidia might be allowed to sell stripped-down AI chips to China again. That's Trump tossing a bone to US tech firms, bleeding revenue. Some said it was a grand bargain play. Others called it strategic backsliding. But it exposed the rift inside the US camp. On one side, the full spectrum hawks, who wanted to suffocate China's tech rise. On the other, the pragmatics, who worry about blowbacks on Silicon Valley. David Sachs, Trump's new AI and crypto czar, he defended the move. His argument: total bans don't cripple China, they just kneecap US firms. It's a classic dilemma. Decouple too fast and you cut your own circuits. But the general direction hasn't changed. Huawei is still blacklisted. TikTok still one executive order away from a nationwide ban, unless it cuts ties with its Chinese parent. So yes, the decoupling isn't loud, but it's steady, quiet attrition, pulling out the rivets of a global system, one policy at the time. And here is also where it gets strategic. This is siege warfare, economic siege, technological siege. Starve the dragon without firing a single shot. The logic: any chip that can power an AI model can also guide a missile. So block the chips, block the tools, block the capital. Don't let China scale. China, of course, calls it hypocrisy, says the US is just trying to rig the game. And look, they're not entirely wrong. This is geopolitics dressed up as market discipline. The US can't stop China's rise, but it's trying to slow it down, clip its wings, delay the inevitable. And America, of course, is putting pressure on its allies. Europe, Japan, the Dutch, especially the Dutch with their chip-making gear, they're all inching into alignment. Some grumble, but they comply. And this brings us to the real engine room, my favorite topic, the information war. Because to wage an economic war this broad, you've got to prepare the public. And honestly, it's working. How? Well, you might want to have a look at my reports on NATO's cognitive warfare program. They are virtually targeting your brain, and I'm saying this as a behavior analyst. You have to see it or read it to believe it. Links are in the description. Mainstream coverage paints China as a dystopian Bond villain. Part surveillance state, part expansionist empire, spy balloons, hacking power grids, cutting underground cables, buying land near US bases, fentanyl hype, whatever that was, you name it. There's a headline for it. A headline about China. Now, is China doing shady stuff? Sure, plenty. But the volume of fear, the constancy, the narrative management, and the effect, I said already, it works. A recent Pew poll shows most Americans now hold a negative view on China. A growing chunk thinks war over Taiwan is likely, even necessary. That's a seismic shift from, say, 10-15 years ago, when the idea of a war with China was laughable. So I'm telling you, cognitive warfare, the warfare on your brain, works. In DC, countering China is the magic phrase. Want more STEM funding? Frame it as beating China in the tech race. Want to ban TikTok? Say it's CCP brainwashing. Need 900 billions for defense? Just whisper Taiwan and collect the checks. It's manufacturing consent 101, but the first century edition. Not for hot war necessarily, although I can't exclude that, but for a prolonged Cold War, or something worse if the fuse catches fire. And the Chinese state media, they play the part too, of course. Loud national rhetoric, talk of resolute retaliation to any provocation. Western outlets eat it up, quote it back. See, look how belligerent they are. So here we are, locked in this echo chamber, each side reacting to the other, each headline fueling the next cycle. And beneath of it all, real shifts, real deployments, real risks. Because at some point, when the story gets big enough, the policies follow, and the public mood, once hardened, becomes the battlefield. So, and finally, who benefits? Who actually profits from all this fever pitch talk of war? Well, you don't have to squint, just follow the money. Northern Virginia's defense corridor is booming. Contractors are raking it in. Raytheon, Lockheed, Boeing Defense, you name it. They are not just building weapons anymore. They are selling a vision. A $1 trillion defense budget that's not hypothetical, it's already in motion. Hundreds of billions locked in for new subs, next-gen missiles, AI systems, whatever scares China the most, that's what's getting funded. Japan's buying Tomahawks. Australia's buying submarines. Taiwan, they're buying everything it can. And now a lot of it subsidized by US taxpayers. The 2025 defense bill, I already mentioned it, 923 billion and counting. The 2025 defense bill, almost $1 trillion and counting. Investors love it. Stock prices are up. CEOs on earnings calls don't even bother with euphemisms anymore. They say Indo-Pacific theater and great power competition, like they're reading from a strategy memo. But what they're really reading is the quarterly growth forecast. It's grotesque, it's conflict as a market opportunity, it's war as a business model, and it's not new. Only the extent is new. I'm working on an executive brief on that very topic, so stay tuned if you're interested. The AUKUS deal that I've already discussed, where Australia is dropping 368 billion on nuclear-powered subs. That's not a contract, it's a 30-year buffet for American and British defense contractors. General Dynamics, BAE Systems, Northrop, they're all getting slices. And it's not just the hardware either. It's the intellectual infrastructure, the think tanks, the opt-end machines, the ex-generals or retainer. These are the same folks shaping the deterrence narrative. And guess what? Many of them get funding from the exact same companies profiting from it. And no, it's not a conspiracy, it's just how DC works. You write a report titled, say, Why America Must Strengthen the Indo-Pacific Posture, and magically your sponsor's logos is on the back page. You go on TV, talk about China's rising threat, and 2 weeks later, you're on a board advising a drone manufacturer. It's the well-known revolving door, but with better suits and longer acronyms. Look, China's rise is a strategic challenge. No one's denying that. But funny how the solutions always seem to involve spending more, building more, selling more. Since the Cold War ended, the defense industry's been looking for its next big story. The war on terror, for example, gave them, give or take, 2 decades of steady cash. But that was low tech. But this, the new Cold War, this is the golden goose. High-end weapons, carrier groups, stealth bombers, hypersonics, missile shields, golden domes, space lasers. It's a budgetary jackpot. And let's not kid ourselves. If war ever does break out in the Indo-Pacific, it won't be the Raytheon XX paying the price. It will be the Taiwanese civilians. It will be young American sailors on ships dodging hypersonic missiles. It will be the Air Force pilots in a real war zone, not one where the enemy hides in a cave, but one where satellites get knocked out of orbit and fleets get sunk in minutes. Wait till the first aircraft carrier sinks. And yet, listen to how those guys in DC talk. You get these dry phrases: capability gaps, force projection, deterrence by denial. It's like war's a spreadsheet, a game of risk played in suits. The language sanitizes it, makes it feel manageable. But let's be very clear, a US-China war wouldn't be manageable. It wouldn't stay conventional for long. And here's the tragedy. Avoiding war would benefit much more people than any arms deal ever could. But regular people, they don't have lobbyists. Raytheon does. The inertia now is massive. Too many careers, budget and beltway narratives depend on confrontation. Try calling for diplomacy and you get labeled weak, naive, maybe even compromised. US Ambassador Josh Freeman told me diplomacy is dead. Meanwhile, every new flare-up, spy balloon, Taiwan election, near miss at sea is seized on to justify staying this very course. So here we are, mid-2025. The US is garrisoning the Pacific, arming allies like it's 1939, drawing red lines in the water. Trump's second term has only accelerated a already ongoing pace. Executive orders, congressional lockstep, more defense directives. Publicly, they still say, we don't want war. But the preparations say otherwise. It's the paradox of deterrence. You build the arsenal to prevent war, but the arsenal itself convinces the other side that war is coming. It's a textbook security dilemma. You build up to feel safer. They build up because you did. Now both sides are armed to the teeth, spooked, and one miscalculation away from their abyss. Even if you think all this posturing is rational, even if you buy the idea that it's just deterrence, what happens when the message gets out of sync? When a Chinese jet passes a US destroyer and someone misreads intent? When a radar glitch turns into a launch order? You think cooler heads will always prevail under pressure? We have seen this movie, Archduke, Sarajevo, Gulf of Tonkin, Kiev. War has a way of breaking through even the best laid strategic frameworks. And if it happens here, between nuclear states with global supply chains on the line and half of the world's GDP sailing through the crosshairs, it's not going to be a regional dust-up. It's going to be history's new chapter, and not a good one. So maybe the real question isn't how we prepare for war with China. Maybe it's why so few people in power are asking, how do we avoid it? Because if the only people asking that question are outside the room, then we have already made the wrong choice. So, for the brave souls who stuck with me that long, if you are hearing this, then one thing is for sure. You are ahead of the pack and nobody can take that away from you. So keep doing what you are doing. And remember, always look beyond the headlines. Over and out.